Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The room had been tense before Camilla spoke, but nothing prepared those present for what happened next. Princess Anne had already delivered a direct warning. One subject was not to be challenged during the crown briefing. Camilla challenged it anyway. William did not interrupt at first. He simply watched. Then his expression hardened. His chair shifted sharply against the floor, and everyone understood that a private disagreement had just become something far more dangerous. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew the closed door gave every word weight. The crown briefing, a private meeting where senior royals coordinate duties, access, ceremonial roles, and future responsibilities, was meant to keep disagreements controlled. William cared because decisions touching Catherine and the Wales household shaped how his family would function as his role expanded. Anne cared because personal battles could fracture the system. Anne had tried to stop exactly that. Before the meeting began, she pulled Camilla aside and warned her not to challenge William's authority over arrangements involving Catherine and his household. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, made the consequence plain. If the issue was raised publicly, he would answer publicly. Camilla entered knowing the risk. Camilla still pushed forward. She demanded that William's control over future household decisions be reconsidered, insisting that the Queen Consort, the king's wife holding royal rank beside him, without sharing sovereign power, should keep direct influence over them. William did not respond immediately. His jaw tightened. Then he placed both hands flat on the table and asked why she was testing a boundary already clearly communicated. Anne felt disappointment before anger. She removed her glasses, set them beside her notes, and watched Camilla refuse to retreat. The Queen insisted that no future arrangement should become untouchable, simply because William wanted it protected. That argument changed the temperature. This was no longer about one seating plan or one briefing paper. It was about influence. William's voice hardened. He told Camilla that if agreed boundaries were deliberately tested, they would have to be clarified formally. Anne watched him choose each word with care, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. Charles remained silent. That silence became the most unsettling thing in the room. William noticed it. Anne noticed it. Camilla did too. The king's next move would decide whether this remained a family dispute or became a struggle over royal authority. Camilla had crossed the line Anne warned her not to cross, but the deeper danger was why that line mattered so much to William. To anyone outside the palace, the confrontation could have looked like another disagreement over protocol. Inside the family, it was far more personal. William believed he was protecting the future. Anne believed she was protecting order. Camilla believed she was being pushed away from influence she had fought decades to gain. And Charles, trapped between them, knew that whichever side he strengthened would leave someone else feeling betrayed. William felt the pressure where Catherine and their children were concerned. His expanding authority was not simply a privilege, it was preparation for kingship, the gradual transfer of responsibility that shapes the future monarch's working court. Every time a settled Wales decision was questioned, delayed, or reopened, he saw more than inconvenience. He saw someone testing whether his judgment could be treated as temporary. Camilla saw the same struggle from the opposite side. She believed standing beside Charles carried real institutional weight, not just ceremonial presence. The Queen Consort, meaning the monarch's wife who supports the sovereign without sharing his constitutional authority, had spent years building acceptance inside the royal structure. Being excluded from future planning felt to her like watching that hard-won influence shrink. Anne understood both arguments and trusted neither emotion. Before the briefing, she had told William privately that his frustration was justified, but fury would give Camilla what she needed, the chance to appear cornered rather than confrontational. He listened, yet his silence told her the resentment was older than that morning. She also knew the Queen had been preparing to raise the issue for days. Charles carried the heaviest consequence. When the meeting paused, the king remained seated while the others left. He stared at the untouched papers before him, then asked an aide for 5 minutes alone. The request sounded simple. His stillness betrayed the truth. Supporting William could wound Camilla. Protecting her could weaken his heir. Doing nothing could damage both deeply. Camilla returned to her private sitting room and removed a bracelet, placing it carefully on the table. Her hands stayed steady. When an aide asked whether she wanted tea, she answered too sharply, then softened her voice. The anger was real, so was the fear beneath it. William remembered earlier decisions involving his household that had been reopened after he believed them settled. Anne remembered one incident more clearly than all the others. It had happened weeks before at a royal gathering, when Camilla made a single choice that changed the meaning of every argument that followed. The Crown briefing had not created the feud. It had reopened a wound, and the true point of no return was still waiting to be exposed. Weeks before William's fury erupted, the first warning sign appeared in a room where almost nobody expected conflict. There was no shouting, no dramatic walkout, just a quiet change to a planned royal arrangement, and one sentence from Camilla that caused Anne to look up sharply. What happened that afternoon convinced the Princess Royal that a boundary was being tested deliberately, and that William would eventually be forced to defend it. William had been tightening control around the Wales household, especially decisions involving Catherine, the children, ceremonial appearances, and access. The Wales household meant the working office and private structure supporting the Prince and Princess of Wales and their family. To him, those choices were preparation for kingship. To Camilla, they were beginning to look like a future court taking shape without her. Camilla felt that exclusion deeply. At a Windsor planning meeting 3 weeks before the Crown briefing, she instructed a senior aide to reopen a seating and precedence arrangement involving Catherine that William's office had already finalized. Precedence was the formal order determining where senior royals sat, walked, or appeared during official occasions. The change looked small. Anne knew it was not. Anne waited until the aides had left. Then she asked Camilla why she had deliberately reopened something already settled. The Queen did not retreat. She answered that no household should assume permanent control simply because William had approved something first. Anne heard the real message beneath the words. This was not about chairs. It was about who had the right to decide. William received Anne's call that evening and listened without interrupting. The prince walked toward the window, stayed silent for several seconds, then asked one question. Was she told it was already settled? Anne answered, yes. Camilla had known. That single detail changed his frustration into distrust. William's voice became colder, not louder. He told Anne he would not create a public confrontation, but if Camilla tested the same boundary again in a formal setting, he would demand a permanent clarification of authority. Anne understood what that meant. The next challenge would not be absorbed quietly, and this time, he would not step back. Anne ended the call and remained at her desk, one hand still resting on the receiver. She knew William had drawn a line, and she knew Camilla did not yet believe he would enforce it. Weeks later, when the Queen raised the same underlying issue in front of Charles at the Crown briefing, Anne understood instantly what was happening. The confrontation was no longer spontaneous. William had already decided what another challenge would mean, and Camilla had just given him the moment he promised he would not ignore. When the briefing resumed, the atmosphere had changed completely. Nobody touched the water glasses. Nobody shuffled papers. Camilla returned believing she had made a legitimate challenge. William returned believing she had deliberately broken an understood boundary. Anne watched both of them take their seats, already knowing what neither side seemed willing to admit. The next few minutes could redefine how power worked inside the family. Charles tried to pull everyone back toward the original agenda, but William would not let the moment disappear. The Crown briefing, a closed senior meeting used to coordinate royal responsibilities and sensitive household decisions, was supposed to prevent confusion before it reached the wider family. That was why this mattered. If settled responsibilities could be reopened whenever someone objected, then the future king believed no boundary around Catherine or his household could ever truly hold. William turned directly toward Camilla. He reminded her that Anne had already warned her not to raise the issue this way. The Queen did not flinch. She answered that she did not require permission from Anne to speak in a royal briefing. The prince stared back, and the silence between them carried more force than shouting could have done. Anne leaned forward before anger could take control. She told Camilla the warning had never been about permission. It had been about consequences. The Princess Royal, the monarch's eldest daughter traditionally given a senior working role, spoke with complete calm. Yet her meaning was unmistakable. She was no longer standing between both sides. She was openly backing William's demand that the boundary be respected. Camilla refused to retreat. She asked whether every decision would eventually become untouchable simply because the future king wanted it that way. Charles looked toward William immediately. Anne went still. The argument had crossed another line. This was no longer about one arrangement inside one household. It was about whether William's growing authority could be challenged before he ever reached the throne. William pushed his chair back and stood. He told Camilla that preparation for kingship was not a personal privilege but a responsibility, and he would not allow that responsibility to be weakened for the sake of internal influence. His fury remained controlled, but nobody mistook the force behind it. Charles finally raised one hand. William stayed standing for a moment, then sat slowly. Camilla looked away first. The king ordered the discussion suspended and requested a written clarification defining authority over future Wales household decisions. That request changed everything. A family dispute was becoming an institutional judgment. The shouting had been avoided, but something far more consequential had begun. Charles had placed Camilla's influence inside a formal process, and the answer could reduce it permanently. The most dangerous royal battles are not always decided by the person who speaks loudest. They are decided by who controls the structure underneath the argument. Once Charles demanded a formal clarification, every private relationship suddenly mattered. The king's authority, William's position as heir, Anne's credibility, and Camilla's standing as consort. What had begun as defiance around a table was becoming a test of whose influence carried real institutional force. Charles understood that the burden now rested with him. As sovereign, meaning the reigning monarch who holds ultimate authority over the royal household, he could decide how responsibilities were divided and where one office's influence ended. William, meanwhile, carried the weight of succession. As heir, he was already gaining greater control over Catherine, their children, and the structure expected to surround his future reign. That made this decision more than family management. It was a rehearsal for power. Charles read the written summary alone before asking Anne to join him. The king removed his glasses and said quietly that he refused to preside over a family that governed itself through retaliation. Anne did not soften her answer. She told her brother that avoiding a decision was still a decision, and leaving the boundary undefined would guarantee another confrontation, perhaps one far more damaging than the argument they had just survived. The paper in front of them went further than Charles expected. It recommended that matters involving the Wales household, future ceremonial planning, and decisions concerning the children remain under William and Catherine unless the monarch personally intervened. The briefing paper, a formal internal document setting out options and recommendations, would not strip Camilla of rank, but it would stop her from reopening settled decisions inside William's sphere on her own authority. Anne watched Charles close the folder and press his fingertips against the cover. He knew exactly how Camilla would read it, not as clarification, as rejection. The Queen had fought for years to secure her place beside him, and now a document approved by her own husband could make that place feel smaller. For Charles, that realization carried a private pain no constitutional wording could hide. Charles hesitated only once. Then he signed the framework. William received the decision without triumph. He had wanted protection around his responsibilities, not a public victory over Camilla. Anne understood that distinction, but she also knew the Queen might not. The power question had finally been answered, yet the emotional cost was only beginning to surface. William had wanted a boundary. Charles had now created one. But the first person forced to feel its full weight would be Camilla. There was no grand announcement inside the palace, no dramatic proclamation. Camilla learned about the new arrangement through a short private briefing, delivered behind a closed door. For the first time since the confrontation, she did not argue. She read the summary twice, placed it back on the table, and asked one question, in a voice noticeably softer than before. Had Charles personally approved every line? Camilla heard the answer and understood the consequence immediately. Final decisions involving the Wales household could no longer be reopened through her office, unless Charles himself requested reconsideration. The restriction mattered because an informal boundary had now become written policy, meaning a documented internal rule that senior royal offices were expected to follow. Anne had tried to prevent exactly this outcome, and the Queen now knew her challenge had made the line harder, not weaker. Camilla asked whether William had demanded the wording. An aide explained that the recommendation had been reviewed and approved by Charles. Her expression changed. Anger gave way to something quieter, hurt. The Queen had expected resistance from William, but knowing the King had accepted the framework made the decision feel deeply personal. Charles came to see her later without advisors. Camilla asked why he had not defended her influence more strongly. The King answered carefully. Protecting her position, he said, could not mean allowing the same dispute to damage his relationship with William or destabilize the future structure of the family. She listened, but the explanation did little to soften the sting. Camilla then learned that Anne had personally supported the clarification and had described repeated interference as unsustainable. That detail cut deepest. The Princess Royal had warned her privately, and now the warning had become part of the reasoning behind a restriction that reduced her freedom to intervene. William reacted differently than Camilla expected. When confirmation reached him, the prince did not celebrate. He told Catherine that he had wanted certainty, not humiliation. His anger had been driven by fear that every future decision involving his family could become another contest. Winning the boundary did not make the damage feel like victory. Camilla sat alone after Charles left. She reached for the phone as if to summon an aide, stopped, and placed it back down. The door clicked shut. Silence followed. The confrontation seemed to have produced a winner and a loser, but Anne was not finished. Her next warning would not be aimed at Camilla. It would be aimed at William, and it would force him to face something uncomfortable about the fury he had brought into that room. And that truth would change what happened next completely. Days after the briefing, Anne asks William to meet her privately. No advisors, no secretaries, no folders on the table. He expects reassurance that he handled the confrontation correctly. He does not get it. Instead, Anne tells him that Camilla crossed a line, but so did he. The fury he showed in that room, she warns, could become just as damaging as the interference he was trying to stop. William listens, but his first reaction is resistance. He tells Anne he stayed controlled, never shouted, and never insulted Camilla. She does not argue about volume. The problem, she says, was the resentment underneath it. Their private meeting has no institutional buffer, meaning no aides, formal process, or palace machinery standing between what they truly think. That matters because she wants him to hear the warning as family, not protocol. Anne makes one point unmistakable. Camilla should never have ignored the earlier warning, and William was right to demand clarity after repeated interference. The Princess Royal does not excuse what happened, but she tells him that being right about the boundary does not automatically make every reaction to it wise. William falls silent. After a long pause, he admits what has been driving him harder than anyone realized. Every challenge involving Catherine and the children makes him fear a future where nothing stays settled, where each decision becomes another internal contest. The prince is not only protecting authority, he is protecting his family from living inside endless conflict. Anne softens, but only slightly. She tells William that future kingship will demand something harder than winning arguments. He must defend boundaries without making every challenger feel conquered. Power that constantly needs anger to prove itself, she warns, eventually becomes brittle. The future king hears the truth in that, even if he does not enjoy hearing it. William changes course. Instead of asking for tighter restrictions around Camilla, he decides to approach Charles about a private meeting involving all four of them. The goal will not be to reopen the formal decision. It will be to repair what the decision damaged. Anne agrees because she knows rules can settle authority while resentment survives underneath. William stands to leave, then stops at the door and thanks Anne. She tells him she warned Camilla because she cared about the family, and she is warning him for exactly the same reason. He nods before walking away. Inside the family, the anger is finally beginning to cool. But before reconciliation can happen, the story escapes palace walls. And outside, one private briefing is about to become a national argument over the monarchy's future. By the following morning, a private royal confrontation had become impossible to contain. The dispute was no longer being discussed in hushed palace corridors. It was on breakfast television, newspaper covers, radio panels, and outside royal gates. Yet one image captured the mood more powerfully than any headline. William arriving for an engagement with a rigid expression, while, miles away, Camilla entered another appearance alone. Charles watched the coverage with growing frustration. The Crown briefing, a private senior meeting used to coordinate royal duties, household responsibilities, and sensitive family decisions, had now been transformed into national spectacle. One television panel described William as an heir finally asserting necessary authority. Another questioned whether Camilla's influence would survive once the future king controlled the monarchy. The king listened for less than a minute before telling an aide to turn the sound off. Camilla felt the public framing more personally. She saw Anne and William repeatedly presented as a united front, while she was described as the figure who had challenged them both. The queen bristled at the suggestion that she had simply tried to seize control. In her mind, she had defended a legitimate place beside Charles. Now the argument was being reduced to victory and defeat, and she knew exactly which side the public believed had lost. William refused to encourage that narrative. His office declined requests for further background briefings, meaning private explanations traditionally given to journalists to provide context without becoming formal public statements. The prince told his team that nobody was to speak as though Camilla had been defeated. He had wanted a protected boundary, not a humiliation campaign, and Anne understood why that distinction now mattered. The pressure increased when palace communications issued carefully measured language, stating that individual royal households operated within clearly established responsibilities. Charles immediately recognized the implication. Without naming the dispute, the statement effectively supported the framework approved after the confrontation. Camilla recognized it too, and the silence that followed inside her office carried more weight than anger. Outside Buckingham Palace, the conflict became impossible to dismiss. A small crowd gathered behind press barriers as newspaper stands displayed a front page dominated by the words, "Royal Line Drawn," with separate photographs of William and Camilla beneath it. Broadcasters repeated the image throughout the morning, turning one headline into the symbol of a monarchy divided over its future. Charles had seen enough. The king summoned William, Camilla, and Anne for one final private meeting. It would not decide who had won. That question was already poisoning everything. It would decide whether the family could still function after the battle. The country had delivered its verdict in headlines. Now the family had to deliver one of its own. The final meeting begins without advisors, briefing papers, or prepared statements. 4 chairs. 4 people. One conflict that has already gone too far. William enters calmer than he was during the crown briefing. Camilla looks guarded. Anne remains unreadable. Charles waits until the door closes before speaking. There will be no further debate over the formal boundary, he tells them. That decision stands. What remains is whether the family intends to survive what it took to create it. Charles makes the verdict unmistakable. William's authority over his household and future family arrangements will remain protected from unilateral interference. The framework, the formal internal rules defining who may act in each royal sphere, will not be reversed. The king also tells Camilla that her role beside him remains important, but she cannot reopen decisions already assigned to the prince's household. Camilla speaks next, and the room changes. She tells Anne that she should not have ignored the warning, and admits that raising the issue inside the briefing made compromise almost impossible. The queen does not apologize for having concerns. She apologizes for how she chose to challenge them. Anne listens without triumph. She wanted the conflict contained before it became poisonous. William answers with restraint. He admits his fury had been building long before that meeting, and that past frustrations shaped his tone. The prince tells Camilla he will defend boundaries again if necessary, especially where Catherine and the children are concerned. But he does not want those boundaries to become permanent hostility. For the first time, she hears protection rather than punishment. Anne explains what both sides missed. Her warnings were never about choosing William over Camilla. They were about stopping personal resentment from turning royal governance into confrontation. Charles accepts the point and establishes one final rule. Any future dispute crossing household boundaries must come directly to him before entering a briefing. No surprises, no strategic challenges, no grievance disguised as procedure. Camilla nods first. William follows. Charles settles back into his chair, and Anne lifts the untouched glass of water beside her. The smallest gesture carries the clearest meaning. The battle is over. William leaves with the authority he believed the future required, but with a harder lesson about leadership. Camilla loses the freedom to push into the Wales household, yet not her place at the royal center. Anne proves that loyalty sometimes means confronting everyone. Charles finally provides the clarity he delayed. The crown briefing exposed the fractures, but the monarchy chose structure over rivalry, restraint over retaliation, and survival over pride. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.